You are standing in the middle of a tropical rainforest, soaked from head to toe. The rain has been falling for several days now, and it is not going to stop. Not going to stop in a way that is almost terrifying. There is no shelter, no fire, because everything is drenched, not even one patch of dry ground to lie down on. You are a creature completely out of place, a bare-skinned ape, warm-blooded, needing dryness, thrown into a giant greenhouse seemingly designed perfectly to break a body like yours down into soil, and the forest knows you are there. Under the layer of decaying leaves, a leech has just caught your warmth and is starting to make its way toward you. In the air, a mosquito carries in its saliva a slow death that you will not see coming until it is too late. On every scratch on your skin, fungal spores are waiting to begin feeding. Yet your ancestors lived here, not for one night, not for one season, but for 150,000 years. Why? Seriously, think about this for a moment. A rainforest, for a human body, is almost a machine built to kill you very slowly. It keeps you wet. It gives you fever. It hides food high up in the treetops and behind poisonous husks. It seals off the sky so you never know where you are. You would think humans must avoid a place like this, must run out to the open grasslands where there is sun and visibility, and we often believe they did exactly that. But they did not. They walked straight in, and they stayed. The reason they chose this place is not just one thing. It has never been just one thing. There are explanations stacked in layers, each one stranger than the last, and together they paint a picture of a choice from far earlier than civilization, earlier than agriculture, earlier than almost everything we still call human history, reaching back to the time when what it meant to be human was still being decided. This story has very deep roots. Let us begin. Begin with something that sounds completely irrational, but is actually just the climate. That giant greenhouse specialized in breaking a human body down into soil that you were just standing in the middle of turned out to be one of the safest places your ancestors found across all of Africa. Not safe in the way you are thinking. It is not comfortable, not dry. It does not spare you a single leech or fever. It is safe in the only sense that truly mattered back then. It does not disappear. And to understand why not disappearing is a matter of life and death, you have to forget the image of a stable earth that you grew up with. For most of human history, Africa was not one place. It was dozens of places constantly trading places with each other, and there were dry periods lasting tens of thousands of years that turned the grasslands we still imagine as the warm homeland of our ancestors into dusty deserts, killing off entire populations living there. The most recent and clearest example is the time when the Sahara was still green, from about 14,500 to 5,000 years ago, when the monsoon turned the deadliest desert on the planet into a savanna full of lakes, rivers, and giraffes, leaving rock paintings of people swimming in places where there is not one drop of water now. On a planet where even the most fertile lands can shut their doors at any moment, the most valuable thing is not the most beautiful place, but the most enduring one. Yet for decades, almost no one thought the rainforest was that enduring place, until the year 2025, when a team of researchers published in the journal Nature that at the Bété site in Côte d'Ivoire, they found traces of humans living in the humid rainforest from about 150,000 years ago. That number is almost absurd. It pushes back all the old milestones to the point where the entire timeline has to be redrawn, because before that the oldest evidence of humans living in the African rainforest was only about 18,000 years, and the global milestone was 70,000 years. And this is not a hasty guess. Because there were no bones or volcanic ash left to date, they had to use two completely different methods at the same time measured on individual quartz grains in the soil, and both pointed to the same number, with the deepest samples reaching 166,000 years. But the detail that makes this discovery spine-chilling is not the age, but the timing, because 150,000 years ago fell right into one of the harshest dry periods this continent had ever experienced. Right at the moment when most of Africa was burning dry and dying off, the forest at Enyama remained green, and the forest signal in that soil layer did not flicker, did not break, but remained consistent in an enduring way through the most violent upheavals. Scientists have a name for places like that: refugium, refuge, fragments of life that hold fast when the world around collapses. The forest was not a place humans drifted into when cornered. It was a place humans retreated to in order to survive. The forest is where life retreats, not where it runs away. But hold on, if the forest is a refuge, then why for nearly a whole century did the scientific community insist that humans could not live there? This is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because the one who built the biggest wall between humans and the rainforest was not the rain, the leeches, or the fever. The one who built that wall was the scientists themselves. To understand why, you have to go back to the time of Darwin, when the study of human evolution fell in love with an image and never really let go: the savanna. An ancestor stepping out from the dark, dense forest, standing upright under the open sky, and becoming human among the sun-drenched savannas stretching wide. In that story, everything that made us, upright posture, free hands, the swelling brain, was forged on the savanna, while the forest was only the dark past that the ancestors left behind when they climbed down from the trees, a place to leave rather than a place to return to. And because the forest had been placed in the past box, people began to look at it with contempt, to the point of giving it a nickname that sounds like a curse: green desert. It looks lush and green, but for a human stomach, according to the classic argument, it is poor to the point of being deadly, and that argument sounded extremely convincing. Starch-rich plants are scattered, hidden carefully, hard to find among thousands of useless or poisonous species. And meat is even worse. Dense forest does not support huge herds of animals like the savanna. There are no prey weighing over 40 kilograms that Ice Age humans were said to crave, only small, fast, scattered creatures that are extremely hard to catch. Put those two things together, little easily accessible starch and little large meat, and you have a calorie equation that on paper simply cannot be solved. In 1991, two researchers named Headland and Bailey wrote straight in a journal that the rainforest could not support a pure hunter-gatherer group, could not, unless they brought agriculture with them. And that prejudice, once nailed down, began to feed itself in the most dangerous way a wrong idea can. Where did archaeologists take their shovels to dig? On the coast, in rock shelters, in the grasslands, in exactly the places they were sure there would be something to find. And in the heart of the rainforest, almost no one bothered to search, because why waste effort digging in a place that everyone agreed was empty? No search, so no find. No find, so even more belief that there was nothing. A perfectly closed circle, self-confirming for decades. The problem is the entire thing was wrong. Wrong in a systematic way. Right in that same year of 1991, other studies showed that just the wild brown tubers and countless other forest plants were more than enough carbohydrate for a human, that the supposedly empty storehouse was actually full to the brim, it just was not laid out for you to see. You had to know which plants, which season, where to dig, how to process to remove the poison. The green desert had never been a desert, it was a giant storehouse, and the problem had never been what was in the storehouse, but that we had not learned how to read it. But admitting that was not easy at all, because it did not just fix a small detail. Admitting that humans could live, even live well in the rainforest, was pulling a brick out of the foundation of the entire savanna building that had stood since Darwin's time. And people are always reluctant to do that, even when the evidence is knocking right at the door. The forest was never the wall. Our fear of it was. So how did your ancestors read that storehouse that modern professors cannot read? The answer is not in the muscles. It is in the hands, and in the things those hands created. Let us leave Africa, go to an island on the southern edge of Asia, into a cave named Fahan Lena in Sri Lanka, where one of the clearest answers to what humans did in the rainforest is preserved. The dating here reaches back to about 48,000 years, and what lies in that soil layer is not the crude chip stones you imagine when thinking of prehistoric people. These are microliths, tiny meticulously crafted quartz pieces, small and sharp and shaped with purpose to fit into wooden hafts as points or cutting edges. And beside them are bone-tipped arrows, ground, shaved, carefully shaped. This is the most important detail, and it is not speculation. On 4 out of 5 of the oldest bone points, they found exactly the type of impact fracture characteristic that only occurs when a sharp tip strikes a target at high velocity. In other words, those arrows were shot, not thrust by hand. This is projectile technology, bows and arrows, along with complex symbolic displays, existing in the tropical South Asian region from 48,000 years ago, one of the oldest traces of that type of weapon anywhere outside Africa. And to understand why they needed that weapon, you have to look up. Prey in the rainforest is not clumsy large animals running on open ground. It is monkeys and squirrels, creatures that are small, lightning fast, living high in the canopy 10, 20, 30 meters up, almost never setting foot on the ground. You cannot chase them, you cannot drive them into traps. You have to stand at the base, crane your neck up, and shoot a target the size of a fist darting through the branches, through a thick screen of leaves that blocks almost all visibility. That is one of the hardest hunting problems nature can pose, almost impossible without a weapon that can shoot from a distance, fast enough, accurate enough. And here is the expensive part. Even today, groups still hunting in the Southeast Asian rainforests use blowpipes and darts to take down exactly those kinds of tree-dwelling prey, because after all those thousands of years, that is still the best solution to the same problem. The ancestors at Fahan Lana solved it from nearly 50,000 years ago, and they did not solve it in a flash of genius that appeared and vanished. In a third cave on the same island, Kitulgala Belilana, they found that same microlithic technology line preserved almost intact over a staggeringly long span, from about 45,000 years ago stretching all the way to 8,000 years ago. Nearly 40,000 years, the same formula, refined and passed on without interruption. That was not luck, not a historical fluke. That was a tradition, a technical lineage continuing through countless hands, each generation receiving the toolkit from the previous and handing it on to the next with almost no wear. The forest locks its food up in the highest layers, behind the thickest leaves, on the fastest prey. And humans invented exactly the thing that could open that lock, and carried it with them from the very first day they set foot in. They did not walk into the forest empty-handed. They walked in with the key. Having tools is one thing. Knowing how to use them for 400 centuries without destroying your own source of life is a completely different matter. And this is where the story shifts from impressive to almost unbelievable. At Fahian Luna, the researchers sat and sorted a total of 14,485 bone and tooth fragments, a number that itself speaks to the meticulousness of the work. And when the picture emerged, it was strange. Monkeys and tree squirrels made up more than 70% of all the identified remains, a ratio so high that even modern rainforest hunting groups with guns and wire snares almost never reach. 3 different monkey species were all in that bone pile, from brown monkeys to several langur species, all living in the trees. On the bone fragments were cut marks, joint separation marks, meat stripping marks, and nearly 1/5 of the bones showed signs of burning, meaning the prey was brought back to the cave whole, butchered, and roasted. But here is the detail that makes you sit up straight. The leg bones of those very monkeys had been carved into points, into weapons used to hunt the next monkey. Prey and weapon were the same animal, a closed loop between today's meal and tomorrow's arrowhead. Yet the most astonishing thing is not how much they hunted, but which ones they hunted. Tooth analysis showed that humans consistently targeted adult individuals at the peak fitness of the troop, and they did exactly that for more than 40,000 years without the monkey populations being depleted. Pause for a second there, because it goes against every instinct. Hunting the young is easy but stupid because you kill the future of the troop. Hunting the old is safe but low on meat. Targeting the right prime adults, in the right amounts, year after year for 400 centuries while the prey population remains stable, that is no longer hunting. That is management. And to see how extraordinary that is, look at ourselves. In modern times, with guns, with satellites, with an entire conservation biology industry, humans still hunt species to depletion one after another in just a few decades. Monkeys and squirrels in the trees are among the most vulnerable prey to hunting pressure. Yet those people holding bone arrows at Fahian Lena kept the monkey troops stable for 40,000 years, a span 7 times longer than all of written human history. That could only come from one thing, a living library passed through countless human mouths, the knowledge of exactly when to stop, which ones to spare, which forests to leave alone to rest. And one more detail caps it all. Isotope evidence shows that throughout all that time, the forest never reached its carrying capacity, never was drained dry, meaning humans were not exploiting it in the desperation of those with no way out. They lived in abundance. They persistently chose the most labor-intensive, hardest-to-catch prey instead of grabbing whatever was easier, and people only do that when they are not being chased by hunger. The same pattern, the generous rainy environment allowing humans not to settle or farm, repeats in other times and places, like the hunter-gatherer communities in southern India nourished by the monsoon. They chose the difficult not because they were forced, but because they could choose. They were not stuck here. They stayed because this place was generous. But a forest, an island, could just be a lucky coincidence. One group of people who happened to be skilled, a lone streak of light in the darkness. If the story stopped at Sri Lanka, you would be completely justified in brushing it aside as a rare exception. The problem is, it is not alone. When you pull the lens back and sweep across the tropical regions of the entire planet, a pattern emerges, and it is that very pattern that truly sends a chill down the spine. In Sri Lanka, humans solved the forest puzzle by specializing in hunting monkeys in the trees. But crossing a sea to Naya cave on the island of Borneo, humans had also lived in the rainforest from about 50,000 years ago, and they solved the puzzle in an almost opposite way, relying mainly on large hoofed animals as their primary meat source. The same type of environment, 2 contradictory solutions. Back in Africa, at Panga Saidi in Kenya, humans had lived off mixed tropical forest bands from at least 78,000 years ago. Over to the New Guinea highlands, they adapted and exploited the plant resources of the forest from about 49,000 to 44,000 years ago. On the island of Sumatra, there are traces of modern humans living amid the forest from about 73,000 years ago, earlier than many milestones we once thought were limits. Then crossing half the globe to the Amazon basin, the first hunter-gatherer groups left layered shell mounds from about 10,000 years ago, the oldest archaeological sites in that vast lowland region. Each forest, its own formula. Each place, an independent solution reinvented from scratch by groups of people who had never heard of each other's existence, separated by oceans and by tens of thousands of years. This was not one clever trick learned once and then passed hand to hand around the world. This was the same species, facing the same type of challenge in completely separate corners of the world, and solving it, time after time, by different paths. Scientists have a name for this strange ability. They call our species generalist specialists, a creature that can both sink deep into specialization for one specific environment, and then turn around and do exactly that in almost every other environment. It sounds contradictory, but that is exactly what we are. And no other large animal species on the planet has that combination. The other human species that came before us, the extinct cousins, were mostly tied to familiar forest and grassland bands clinging to rivers and lakes, lands their bodies had grown accustomed to. But Homo sapiens spread into high mountains, deserts, icy polar regions, tropical rainforests, all almost at the same time. That is not a minor detail in our survival story. It is very likely the reason we are the only human species left, while all our relatives disappeared one after another. A jaguar is the absolute master of the forest, but throw it into the desert and it dies. A camel is the absolute master of the desert, but push it into the forest and it dies. Humans are masters of something completely different, the ability to become a master wherever they set foot. One species, countless forests, countless ways. That is not coincidence. That is us. And now we come to the layer that shifts the entire story from adaptation to dominance. Because your ancestors did not stop at learning how to live in the forest. They began making the forest change to fit them. This is where the romantic image most of us carry in our heads gets turned upside down. The picture of hunter-gatherers tiptoeing along in passive harmony with an untouched, inviolable, pristine nature. The truth is far rougher. Humans intervened. Combined evidence shows that humans had been transforming tropical forests for at least 45,000 years in every possible way, from controlled burning to managing plants and animals, even clear-cutting patches of forest. In New Guinea, pollen and microscopic charcoal particles trapped in the soil layers tell how the first groups of people who set foot there deliberately lit fires and stirred up the forest to encourage useful species to grow, especially those that thrive in open spaces like wild tubers. Understand the logic behind that action. A closed canopy primary forest, to you, is a poor forest because the thick leaf layer high up blocks the light and locks almost all the food up in the canopy. But if you carve out an opening, a deliberate wound in the green carpet, sunlight immediately pours down to the ground and there pioneer species grow, tuber plants, exactly the kind that both you and your prey crave. And here is the key point, the part that is completely different from just living off what the forest already provides. Opening the canopy, creating a mosaic of old and young patches, actually raises the carrying capacity of the forest beyond its natural level. In the temperate forests of North America, just moderate clearing by humans causes white-tailed deer populations to explode, because deer love those young green openings more than the dark heart of old forest. Ancestors in the tropical rainforest applied that exact principle tens of thousands of years earlier. They did not simply hunt the prey the forest gave them. They shaped a forest that produced more prey, and then hunted. And in New Guinea, by the early and middle Holocene, around 10,000 years ago, that path went all the way to true agriculture, with humans cultivating wild tubers, bananas, and taro, among the earliest tropical forest plants ever domesticated on Earth. Those hands left even deeper marks. There is evidence, though still debated, that human activity contributed to wiping out a few rare large mammal species that the forest once had at the end of the Pleistocene, changing tree density, species composition, and even the way the forest regenerated afterward. Adding all those marks together, an uncomfortable truth emerges, what we call primary forest, the virgin forest that the modern conservation world worships as a symbol of untouched nature, is largely a myth. Those forests had been pruned, burned, and shaped by human hands for thousands of generations, and it is the indigenous communities still living in the forests today who are the ones preserving that ancient knowledge, the knowledge that science has only just begun to learn how to read. Your ancestors did not go looking for a ready-built house in the forest. They made the forest into a home. By this point, the story sounds almost too beautiful. Humans stepped into an uninhabitable place, read the supposedly empty storehouse, invented the key to open the forest canopy, managed prey for 400 centuries, solved the same puzzle across the planet, then shaped entire ecosystems to their will. But if I stopped here, I would be lying to you, and this story deserves to be told more honestly than that. because the forest never let humans win easily. There is a killer in the forest that no bone arrow could reach, and it is so small you cannot see it: malaria. In the year 2026, a study published in Science Advances, carried out largely by the same team that excavated Bete achieved what seemed impossible, tracing the traces of this disease back deep into prehistory by reconstructing where the mosquito species carrying the pathogen could have lived under ancient climate conditions. The results show that for 74,000 years, malaria had quietly decided where humans were allowed to live in Africa. It pushed groups of people away from high-risk areas, and ironically, those very high-risk areas were often the wet, waterlogged, teeming with life places, in other words, the forests and forest edges. The same environment that beckoned humans with abundance also drove them away with an invisible death, and the overlap between humans and the disease only surged at the exact major turning points, such as when our species spread out of Africa around 60,000 years ago. Humans, of course, fought back. Protective mutations, including the one causing sickle cell, appeared in Africa around 25,000 to 22,000 years ago, an arms race written straight into our blood. There are even traces showing humans once lined their sleeping places with aromatic plants that repel insects, a kind of mosquito repellent from a time before writing existed. But no matter how much they fought back, the truth remained: the forest always demanded a price paid in blood. And there is a second, far more subtle layer of loss that makes this whole story feel heartbreakingly fragile. The forest does not just kill people, it erases the evidence that people were ever there. The hot, humid climate eats away bones, dissolves artifacts, swallows entire sites so quickly that most of the human past in the forests has vanished without a trace, and that is exactly why we have so few fossils from these places. The very Bete site, the one that single-handedly overturned the timeline, was completely leveled by bulldozers from a stone quarry sometime between the year 2020 and 2021, right after the scientists managed to scrape up the last batch of samples. Just one beat too slow, and perhaps we would never have known. Putting those two layers of loss together, you realize something terrifying: that we are almost blind in both directions. Blind to the failures, because the forest quietly swallowed the remains of groups who stepped in and never stepped out. And blind to the successes too, because the forest also swallowed the traces of groups who lived there for a very long time, very healthily, very prosperously, stories we will never get to hear. Each discovery, like Bete is therefore not a chapter being opened, but a ray of light slipping through a crack, flashing for a moment before the crack closes forever. The forest hid both the victories of your ancestors and erased their failures. And now let us return to the Bete site one last time, but this time looking at it from a completely different angle. Throughout the entire story, we have still treated the forests as a chapter in the human past, a place our ancestors visited and then conquered. But the truth is much bigger than that, because that very same site that pushed back the timeline, when placed alongside other pieces across the continent, confirms something about our very origins, a model that scientists call Pan-African evolution. According to this model, Homo sapiens never emerged from a single cradle, not from any mythical savanna valley. We took shape from multiple populations scattered across Africa, living in different environments, separating and then meeting again, exchanging genes over hundreds of thousands of years, ever since this species first appeared nearly 300,000 years ago, the time when early fossils like those at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco have recorded. And one of the environments that helped shape us, one of the forgotten mothers of the entire species, was precisely the rainforest. It was not that the forest was a place we went to, the forest was part of the place we were born. Forest blood lies in the deepest roots of who we are, as old as the existence of our species itself. And remember that disease just mentioned, that invisible malaria, the thing that pushed groups apart and pinned them into separate safe zones. It did not just kill. That very dividing force, over tens of thousands of years, helped tear populations apart and mix them back together in different ways, quietly carving the very genetic structure each of us still carries in our bodies today. Both the life and the death in the forest, both the generosity and the disease, were hands that together shaped humans. And here is the final twist, the twist that leaves a bitter taste in the mouth. The tropical forests hold in their soil the answer to the biggest question our species has ever asked: who we are and where we came from. They are the last remaining archive of a forgotten half of our own backstory. And right now, we are flattening that archive faster than at any time in history. Every hectare of forest burned to the ground is not just trees falling and animals fleeing. It is a page in the record about ourselves being torn out and thrown into the fire before anyone could read it. A piece of the answer vanishing forever before we even knew the question. The forest made us, and now we are burning the place that holds the answers. So now let us go back. You are still standing at the edge of that forest. The rain is still falling without stopping. Everything is still damp and rotting, and the darkness is still dripping behind the wall of leaves. That initial feeling is still there, the instinct whispering that this is an alien place, a hostile place, a place not meant for a creature like you. But now you know. That feeling of alienation is not the truth, it is a forgetting, because this place has never been alien to you. This is one of the very first homes your species ever had, one of the places that patiently taught your ancestors how to be human. The ability that lets you live today in the scorching desert, on the Arctic ice, in brightly lit concrete cities, on almost every dry inch of this planet. The ability that makes you the only species not tied to any single homeland, was not forged in an easy place. It was tempered here, right in the middle of this never-ending rain, in the very place that should have been uninhabitable. The forest was not a challenge your ancestors overcame and then left behind. The forest was the first forge. And that uneasy feeling running down your spine right now, that eerie premonition that something is not right, turns out not to be a sign that you do not belong here. It is the complete opposite. It is a very faint, very distant echo of a home that the blood in your veins still remembers, even though your mind forgot it long ago. You are not a stranger standing at the forest's door. You are the child who went too far. Went to the farthest corners of the planet, so far that you forgot the face of where you began, forgot that you once belonged to a place this wet, this dark, and this alive. The question we asked right from the start, why would anyone choose to live where the rain never stops, turned out to be wrong from the very first word. They did not choose a strange place to go to, they simply never really left home. And the next time you hear rain tapping steadily on the roof, that ancient sound that for some reason makes the heart settle and feel strangely safe, perhaps now you understand why. A very deep part of you once slept peacefully under exactly that sound, in exactly a forest like this, from a very, very long time ago. The forest never drove your ancestors away. It taught them how to go everywhere. If the story about the first home of our species just made you look at the forest with a different eye, please subscribe to the channel, because every week we dig up another piece of the past that your ancestors left forgotten. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so the next time science overturns one more thing you once believed for sure about humankind, you will be the first to hear it.